I'm Caity Massoud, and this is Flute Unscripted. I sit down with a new artist every week and share their uncensored stories with you. You're listening to Season 2, brought to you by Flute Center of New York, the exclusive marketplace for flutes. Join us and subscribe, and please stay tuned to the end of the episode for a very special Flute Center of New York code for our podcast listeners. Brandon George is a Powell artist that has performed around the world as a soloist and chamber musician, but he currently calls Brooklyn his home. With a full and varied freelance career, Brandon has performed regularly at some iconic New York venues such as Carnegie Hall, Tully Hall, Bargemusic in Brooklyn, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Brandon has his own advice for flutists starting out in their career too, highlighting the importance of fostering a strong, lasting relationship with your peers and colleagues. In his new album, to be released soon, Brandon recorded with many collaborators and plays on the contrasts and similarities between old and new through diverse repertoire and instruments. The album features a new solo work by living Finnish composer Kalevi Aho, alongside some Bach, Boulez, and Prokofiev. Thanks for being here, Brandon.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're a freelance artist here in New York City, Powell Artist as well.
Yes.
Did you know what to expect when you moved here to pursue your master's, right? You came from Ohio.
Right.
Did you kind of know this was the path you're going to take when you came here, or was it just buckle in and see what happens?
Oh, well, good question. I knew that I was interested in like solo work and chamber music, and I also enjoy teaching. And when I was getting ready to leave Oberlin, of course I had to think, where did I want to go next? And looking at different schools across the country, I was drawn to New York because of the opportunities that I would have after school, and also all the things that would be happening while I was in school.
Right.
And so I had this conversation with my teachers, and at this point, I had just gotten back from studying abroad in Paris. And so that was an option for me to go back after I had finished Oberlin. But my teachers, being French, were sort of like, you've had this kind of training for 4 years. It could also be good for you to have another kind of training, another teacher. That's going to give you something a little bit different. At the same time, there was the whole idea of finding work in another country that I was not from. Yeah. So they were thinking of that as well, and so they were pushing for me to go to New York.
Where were you studying in Paris?
I was studying in Paris with Sophie Cherrier, who's one of the two professors at the Paris Conservatory. I think Philippe Bernot is teaching there now, but she's been teaching, I think, since the early 2000s and took over for Alain Marion. And so I studied with her. I had met her when I did Rumpal competition some years ago, and so she invited me to come and study. So I did an abroad type program.
Nice.
Yeah.
And do you have any advice for students then that are leaving school that want to pursue freelancing?
Advice,
if it can be summed up into a nice couple sentences. I know that's hard to do. It's a big topic.
It is a big topic. I had my own ideas of what I thought was going to happen. I knew what I was interested in, and I thought, I'm just going to go and it's just going to be like this. And nothing has turned out the way I planned at all.
Yeah.
But I'm really happy because there's certain things that you can't plan for. But what I could say is, of of course, practice. That's obvious. You have to practice, and always want to get better and to be better than you were the day before. But be flexible. When you're in school, take seriously not only your lessons but chamber music, because you get called to do lots of chamber music and sometimes to sight read concerts at the last minute, and you have to be able to step in and do that. So not only because I think when I was in school, and I'm sure it's like this because all music schools are like this, but there's this mindset that I'm just going to practice and practice all the time. And you practice for your lessons, and then other things don't they sort of fall later, and that makes sense, right? But I think take seriously the idea that you have to be able to be a good sight reader, and be flexible. So take special care to work hard at being a good collaborator and chamber musician and being able to fit in different,
and maybe also the relationships you have with your fellow students and colleagues too, because you don't know when you might meet them. And you play with harp now, right? Do you play around the country and you tour and play concerts? Was that someone that you had gone to school with? Or?
Yeah, we started working together while we were students in school. We literally played both junior and senior recitals of one another while we were in school. And the connection was great. And after school, we just kept doing that. And we make it a point to come together and to still play concerts we've recorded together. So yeah, you never know.
Yeah.
So it's really important to be good to one another, and because you never know who you'll be working with,
exactly,
or who might call you, or who might not call you. So it's very important.
Yeah. You also collaborate on a CD that you just came out with recently, right? When was that released?
Oh, it's coming out.
To be.
It's coming out later this summer. It's finished.
Okay.
It's
finished.
Exciting.
It's been in the works for a couple years, right?
Yeah, it started last year. I had this idea that I wanted to play different flutes on my first recording project, and so I used the platinum flute, the famous Powell, for that.
I should say for our listeners, that's the Powell that was made for the World's Fair, right?
Right. And I recorded Claviajo's Solo 3. I don't know if a lot of people know this piece, but it's quite demanding, and I thought it would be perfect because it shows off like all the extremes of the flute, the low, the high, the fast, everything that the flute can do. It's a real showpiece, and so I thought I would feature that work and use that flute.
Yeah.
But yeah, and there's the Boulez Sonatine is on there. And I recorded that with Steve Beck, who's here in New York, and the Prokofiev Sonata with Jacob Greenberg, who's the pianist for Ice, who I've gotten to work with through my collaborations with Ice. And there's Bach Partita.
Yeah, so. And some Bach, Bach thrown in there.
Yeah.
And so what was it like playing and recording on all these different instruments?
It was a real juggling act.
Yeah.
Because I had to keep all of these pieces in shape on different instruments for a period of months. And I sort of had a timeline where I would record one, and then that's like, okay, I'm done with that, and I can leave that flute on and we'll go to the next. But as people who have recorded know, you run into different problems, and so sometimes you'll have to redo something. For instance, we recorded the Bach and the Claviajo in a church on the Upper West Side. It's a gorgeous space, and we went in at 10 p.m. was when the session started, and we went from 10 until 2 some nights. But even so, you still run into the garbage trucks, you run into the cabbies honking their horns. So there were some things that we thought that we got down that we just had to do over because of that outside noise, which sort of drug out that process and made me have to stay in shape on these different flutes, and because they had different tendencies and things like that. And if I went too long without playing one of them, it's like, oh yeah, this is the one that has like the funky low register or something like that. So it was a really hard process, but it was such a great process because I grew so much and became, I think, way more flexible than I had ever been. So it was really good for me, but also really challenging.
Is this CD going to be released independently, or was this something that you got through a label?
It's going to be released on Hansler Classics out of Germany. And they will distribute it worldwide.
That's wonderful.
And it will be available, of course, on streaming and all the places that people listen to music now.
It's a long process, though, recording a CD and getting it off the ground running.
It is.
Yeah, you had a lot of support from fans and family, and you were doing
fans,
online
family. Flute Center offered great support as well. That's just the world that we live in, and it's so great. I mean, it's a blessing and a curse at the same time, because a lot rest on the artist to do a CD. It used to not really be that way, but with the rise of streaming, record labels really look to artists to make sure that they have the resources to help, because record labels aren't really profiting off of selling CDs the way that they used to with streaming. It's just the reality. And so a lot rests on the artist to fundraise. But that's also wonderful because you get people interested in the process. Yeah. It's way different than, I'm going to go record a CD and then now here it is. Now go listen. Because I was actually able to share in the process with a group of people who contributed to the project. So they got to see what it was like for me each week to take on a different work with a different flute. And I think it was probably a lot more interesting for them to have experienced it in that way. Yeah. And I'm glad for the support and that I was actually able to share it with them in that way.
You talked a little bit about Ice. Can we talk a little bit more? What's it like working with Claire Chase?
Claire's awesome. You know, a lot of the concerts that Ice does, a lot of them are chamber. So, sextets, this and that, right? So Claire and I only played together on one project, and that was for... they did a big thing at the Park Avenue Armory 2 years ago, Louis Andreessen, and there was a full ensemble, and there were actually 3 flutes. So there was me and Claire and Elise Tessier, who's also the other flute player, and soprano. She's incredibly virtuosic and flexible, but she also played as well. Okay. And I think Claire's fantastic. And I met Claire when I was a student at Oberlin. Right towards the time that I was getting ready to leave, she had come back to do an entrepreneurship class or talk, and I went to that, and we reconnected when I came to New York. And she's incredible. She's an inspiration and has been a tremendous support for me as well.
The friendships and partnerships that Brandon George has developed over the years have also led to some unique performance opportunities, such as the request for him to practice the flute for art students while they worked. He has also worked with the Met Museum to feature French flute music. As a part of a series of multiple new projects, Brandon performed music of the French flute tradition while viewers in the gallery studied artwork by the French Impressionists. To achieve the tonal colors meant to blend with the artwork, Brandon employed the use of a Louis Lot flute in addition to the modern scale classical flute. So the last time we saw you here at Flute Center, you were playing our Louis Lot flutes.
Yeah.
You're getting to give a performance, a historical performance at the Met. You just played that this past weekend. Can you talk about your latest project with the Met and how you kind of got involved with them and this Versailles Garden concert?
Yeah. Well, playing the Louis lot was fantastic. It was a fantastic experience. But I know the curators over at the Met, and they've been involved in some projects of mine and supported me for many years now. And they knew of my interest in not only performing modern music, but also performing early music as well. And they had these two exhibitions taking place, Visitors to Versailles, which was centered around the reign of Louis XIV, and the Paris to Provence, which is still running, is an impressionist exhibition, and also highlighting the rise of gardens around the early 20th century, late 19th century, when there were all of these plants being imported from other countries, from Asia. And this inspired artists like Monet, who began to paint the gardens and using watercolors in this. So the Met instrument curator, one of them, had an idea to feature flutes. Because it's French, right?
Yeah,
it's French
true.
art, so
Yeah.
she's like, this would be perfect. And I said, I would love to. And so much of my training has been French and being exposed to that repertoire. I was happy to. So that was really fantastic. The Met has a really beautiful musical instrument collection, which I don't know if people have seen, but it recently underwent a huge renovation and has just reopened. And they have an extraordinary collection of flutes. That Powell 360 used to be on display at the Met for a short time when it was on loan. But they have a very beautiful collection. Unfortunately, the instruments have not been maintained. They've sort of been behind glass. And so, but they wanted me to play on historical flutes. And I already have my own Traverso, but I play, of course, updated
Right.
modern flute because of the tuning and this and that. But thanks to the Flute Center, I was able to play a Louis lot from 1874, which is ridiculous. The sound on that thing was incredible. And so I featured that one for the Paris to Provence concert in the Garden. And for the Versailles concert, I actually used a Hernandez Baroque flute from the Flute Center because mine cracked 6 days
sad.
before the performance. And the gentleman that works on my flute lives in California, so I would have to ship it. It would not be back in time for the concert. So I also used a Baroque flute from the Flute Center.
To kind of give people an idea of what these instruments could sound like if the ones that are behind glass right now were restored and were playable.
Right.
Yeah.
This is what they sound like, which was absolutely incredible. I loved playing the Louis lot. It had such a wide range of tone colors that you can get out of it. You could really, if you blow the right way, really dig in and get some dark, nasally colors. You know, I did the Afternoon of the Fawn, the version for flute and harp, and so I had to play the oboe solos as well in addition to the flute solo. So it was really nice to have an instrument that could sort of, you could dig in and get that nasally quality as well. Now, there were some difficulties playing this flute as well because it's old, right? And the pitch that they played at back then is not quite the same. We play much higher now. So it was a little difficult to blow it up to pitch and to get it to kind of stay there. Also, the scale is different. Yeah. The scale is much different. So everything below middle E flat tend to be very on the low side. And so there are these things that we do on the flute to fix the tuning, right? It's, you say, okay, if things are too low, let's push in. But the thing with the way this flute was built is that if you push in too much, yes, it would bring the low register up, but then the high register would be incredibly sharp.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, well, your next thing is, why don't I roll out, which that will sort of maybe bring some more evenness to it. Okay, but then the low register sort of becomes airy and distorted. And then the high register too sharp and bright. So one of the things that you just have to deal with is that if it hasn't been retuned and it's that old scale, that the low register is just going to be on the low side, and there's going to be some you give and take. In order to get it to work well, you're going to have to change things, and you might not like the tone so well, but it'll get it closer to pitch.
It's challenges with these instruments.
Yeah,
for sure.
It's really challenging. But I loved the colors that you get out of it, and I don't know if you played the Louis Law. We went some duets together. You know, there's a bit of resistance in that you can't blow.
Right.
Like my Muramatsu, like I can blow a ton of air through it and get a huge sound. But almost if you do that on the Louis Law, nothing will come out.
Yeah.
So you have to back off. But that's also beautiful, because then when I go back to playing my updated, flute, it's way easier to play, and my touch is probably a little bit lighter than it had been. So there's a lot of beauty in playing the old flutes, that even if you don't play them in concert, in orchestra or chamber music, where you're playing with people at 440 and above, that there's a lot of benefits from having it around to practice on.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
So just your backup Louis Lot, that you just everyone should have a Louis Lot kicking around that they can practice on.
I know people in New York who have had like old Powells and old Haynes flutes around, because they love the sound and they love the feel and touch. And
they're still different instruments, even though they're not as old as the Louis Lots, for sure.
Right, they're different instruments, and they can't unfortunately play them, say like in the New York Philharmonic or something like that, or in chamber music settings, but they use them at home because what it brings to their playing. Yeah.
You also have a video out that's really fun that I came across of you practicing while artists are painting and working on their projects.
Oh yeah.
What was that? What was that all about? And are you really interested in the relationship between art and music?
I totally am interested in that. Hence my interest in doing the concerts at the Met Museum. I have a good friend who's a professor of art at Cooper Union. He's a wonderful painter, visual artist. His name's Will Villalongo. And he and I have shared many meals and conversations about the intersection of art and music and its similarities. And he had this idea that he wanted me to come and to practice with his drawing students as they drew and painted. Mm-hmm. He did not want me to perform. This was not for me to go and to give a recital for 2 hours during their class. It was literally for me to go and practice. So I took my flute to Cooper Union, and for 2 hours I practiced. And they drew whatever, if they were inspired by what I did, they drew that, and most of them were drawing things, just what they were feeling, what they had experienced over the past couple of years, taking the class and this and that. But it was a really remarkable experience. And I just walked through my process. I think we all have developed a process of practicing that we've gotten from our teachers and things that we've picked up from other people over the years. And so I have my whole routine, and I just kind of did it. I did that, and then I started to practice some of the solo music I was working on for concerts I was getting ready for. And they did their thing. And it was really moving and inspiring to talk to them about their process, and for them to ask questions about my process, and to see the work that they created during the class.
Sounds like a really fun practice session.
It was a really, really fun. I was like, can I do this every
Yeah,
every
sounds
day?
nice and
it was
different from being in a room by yourself. And yeah,
to have people actually, when you're in a room by yourself and you're practicing, you stop and you mark something on the page. You don't think anything of it. But when you stop and there's dead silence and there are 15 people spread out across the room and some of them look up like, why did he stop? It's like, well, I'm here to practice, you know? It's not a performance. So it was a really, really great experience. And so I'm going to go back in this coming fall semester and do another thing with the students at Cooper Union.
That's exciting.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. It's really an amazing thing. And I encourage anyone who has friends who are artists or dancers to collaborate.
Yeah.
It's really remarkable what we as musicians can do when we collaborate with other art forms.
What do you think are some of the benefits or some of the takeaways?
I think it's inspiring to work. I've collaborated with dancers. I think to see the movements that are involved not only inspire you in the way you might phrase or your nuances, but that you'll reconsider perhaps your entire interpretation of something. Take like Midsummer's Night Dream, for instance. I would encourage people to go and to actually watch it being performed and watch dancers. Like, it's not this crazy, fast, virtuosic thing that we make it and suck the life out of it for auditions, right? It's this light ballet work that has, and when you watch the dance, there's such flair and grace, and it's all fantasy, right?
Yeah.
It's like this dream, and so there's fairies, and there's all this sort of like mysterious stuff that almost doesn't make any sense, but it's really cool to watch, and the dancers' movements are so graceful and light and not heavy, and it's also generally played not very fast.
Right. Yeah.
Contrary
light bulb moment.
Contrary to what people think, how fast can I articulate and move my fingers?
Right.
It will totally change the way you interpret it. So for me, by collaborating with dancers, it's sort of, I think it brings a lot of grace and sort of makes you play in a sort of more dignified and poised manner than you would just by yourself. I think playing at the Met was fantastic to be surrounded. I mean, I played Fawn in front of Monet's, paintings. To be surrounded by these paintings and to be able to be in that kind of space, to feel what it was like to be in a garden at that time where you could find musicians playing or find composers writing, painters painting.
Yeah, it's all very bohemian too, which harkens back to that time period.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that experience in itself, I think I probably played Fawn in a much different way than I would have if it had been just in a concert hall or sitting in an orchestra with 80 musicians around, and that's a whole different experience, right? But this is a whole nother experience to be influenced by the atmosphere, those around you. You can really draw a lot of inspiration from that. You can't get that in a practice room. You can't get it in a practice room, and you can't get it. You can maybe get it a little bit of it if you do YouTube and things like that, but I think you really have to get outside of your comfort zone and to really experience these things. It really transforms how you play, for sure.
Well, Thank you so much for swinging by. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I look forward to your CD. I can't wait. When is the official release date?
We're thinking August.
Okay.
But I will certainly keep everyone informed. Like I said, it's done. And those things always take more time than you think. But once they have it, I have no control over.
Well, we will.
I did the work.
We will eagerly wait.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Brandon's collaborations across disciplines, specifically art and music, show how a little perspective and context can drastically change perceptions and interpretations. He certainly inspires me to seek inspiration out in the real world and bring my real-life experiences into my playing. I hope he does the same for you, too. Thank you, Brandon George, for providing a selection of the Prokofiev Sonata from his latest album, to be released very soon. This has been an episode of Flute Unscripted. This podcast is sponsored by the Flute Center of New York. Visit their website at flutesforsale.com for the largest selection of new and pre-owned instruments. Use this season's promo code LISTEN for a special deal of $50 off any purchase of $4.99 or more. You can follow the Flute Center on Instagram and like them on Facebook to stay up to date on the latest events and masterclasses. Special thanks to our owner Phil Unger, the Flute Center team, and Stefan Huskoldson for our theme music.